When passion meets peril, the line between triumph and tragedy can vanish in a heartbeat. And for these 6 athletes, what began as routine competition became their final moments. From scorching desert marathons to icy mountain peaks, these are the shocking stories of when sports turned deadly. It was July 15th, 2017, when a heat advisory blanketed Phoenix, Arizona. By mid-morning, temperatures soared past 115 degrees Fahrenheit, with bone-dry air and merciless sun beating down on dark asphalt that shimmered with heat waves. Orion Ford, a 34-year-old office worker from Seattle, had traveled to Arizona for this regional marathon. Fellow runners from his Seattle group described Ford as methodical in his training approach. He had completed 12 marathons over 6 years, all in the Pacific Northwest's temperate climate. Race registration records show this was his first desert event. Ford's running club teammates noted he typically researched courses extensively before competitions. The race organizers proceeded with an earlier 6 a.m. start time despite the heat advisory. The course featured sparse misting stations along the 26.2-mile route with limited shade coverage. Ford registered the day before and appeared at the starting line wearing standard lightweight running gear. He wasn't aiming for a personal best. He had planned a slower, more cautious pace because he had never run a desert course before. Weather monitoring equipment recorded humidity levels below 15% with minimal wind. The early miles proceeded normally, according to course officials. Volunteers observed Ford taking measured sips at aid stations while maintaining steady splits through the first half of the race. Radio communications between course officials included repeated reminders about slowing pace and increasing fluid intake as temperatures climbed steadily. Spectators noted heavy sweating among all participants, with many runners already showing signs of heat stress. Some volunteers also noticed Ford briefly touching his temples and slowing his reactions. Early signs of heat exhaustion that can appear long before a runner realizes something is wrong. Around mile 18, course observers noticed significant changes in Ford's running form. His previously fluid stride shortened considerably, and he began drifting across lane markers. When volunteers offered water at the next station, witnesses saw him wave them off and continue forward without breaking stride. His clothing appeared increasingly soaked with perspiration, and several volunteers noted his flushed appearance. Race medics later noted that rising core temperature can impair judgment, causing athletes to irrationally refuse help even when in visible distress. By mile 20, volunteers noted Ford's appearance had changed dramatically. His skin looked hot and dry where it had previously been drenched in sweat. This sudden absence of sweat is a critical indicator of heat stroke, showing his body had lost the ability to cool itself. Witnesses described his movements as increasingly erratic, weaving between painted lane lines like someone disoriented. Several spectators called out encouragement and warnings, but Ford showed no acknowledgement of their presence. Near mile 22, Ford collapsed face first onto the scorching pavement. Bystanders reported brief convulsive movements before he went completely still. Course medics reached him within minutes, finding him unresponsive. They immediately measured his rectal core temperature at 106.3 degrees Fahrenheit and began aggressive cooling protocols with ice packs around his neck, groin, and armpits, while starting chilled intravenous fluids. Because he collapsed on an exposed stretch of road with no shade or cold water immersion equipment nearby, the crucial first minutes of cooling were lost. Ford remained unresponsive throughout all treatment attempts. Paramedics loaded him into a ground ambulance for immediate transport to the regional medical center, continuing cooling efforts during the journey while monitoring vital signs. Hospital records show Ford was pronounced dead after medical staff exhausted all stabilization attempts. The medical examiner determined that exertional heat stroke had triggered multi-organ failure as the official cause of death. The incident prompted immediate policy changes. Race organizers implemented stricter heat protocols, including earlier cutoff times and mandatory on-course cooling stations for future events. It was August 12, 2017, when Red Rock Canyon, Nevada, presented ideal conditions for free solo climbing. Clear skies stretched across the desert landscape with temperatures reaching 95 degrees Fahrenheit and light winds during the early morning hours. The sandstone cliffs rose 800 feet above the valley floor, with established climbing routes documented by local climbing organizations. Thea Alcott, a 29-year-old outdoor recreation professional, planned to attempt a free solo ascent of the Solar Slab route rated at 5.6 difficulty. Park registration logs show Alcott signed in for unroped climbing activities. The route involved climbing without ropes or protective equipment, according to documented climbing practices. Multiple witnesses positioned themselves at the base area and nearby climbing routes. Photography teams documented climbing activities from established vantage points throughout the morning session. Weather monitoring equipment recorded stable atmospheric conditions with minimal wind affecting the cliff face. Alcott began her ascent during early morning hours. Witnesses observed her climbing progression on the textured sandstone surface through the initial sections. Photography equipment captured her movement during the lower portions of the route according to camera timestamps. Around 200 feet of elevation, witnesses documented Alcott continuing upward on the established route line. The sandstone displayed characteristics typical of the area. Multiple observers tracked her movement through binoculars and telephoto camera equipment from base positions. Recent temperature swings had left the sandstone more fragile than usual, a known issue in red rock, where seemingly solid holds can shear unexpectedly. While climbing at approximately 350 feet of elevation, a handhold broke away under Alcott's weight, causing her to drop out of position. Photography equipment captured the rock failure sequence as she fell roughly 25 feet onto a narrow ledge below. Alcott fell backwards from the wall, with witnesses documenting her fall through photographic evidence. Impact with the ledge arrested her fall, according to witness observations. Witnesses observed Alcott hanging from the ledge with visible injuries to her extremities. She maintained her grip on the ledge while witnesses noted her distressed condition. Multiple witnesses immediately contacted emergency services through cellular communication from the base area. Park rangers coordinated technical rescue operations with helicopter support according to radio communications. Rescue teams deployed specialized equipment for high-angle rescue procedures. Helicopter teams had to hover at a distance to avoid rotor wash destabilizing climbers, forcing rescuers to set multiple anchor points before reaching her. Radio logs document that the operation required 3 hours to safely lower Alcott from the ledge to ground level. Emergency medical personnel evaluated Alcott at the base before helicopter transport to the regional trauma center. Hospital records document a compound fracture of the left wrist and dislocation of the right shoulder upon admission. Medical documentation shows hospitalization for treatment and observation. Hospital records indicate surgical intervention for the wrist fracture with hardware placement. Shoulder reduction was performed according to medical documentation. Follow-up records show an extended rehabilitation period with physical therapy protocols. Medical records document recovery progress over multiple months. Follow-up documentation indicates residual limitations in left-hand function. Records show Alcott eventually returned to climbing activities according to medical clearance documentation. Park Service records document equipment positioning changes at popular free solo climbing locations following the incident. Official safety briefings were updated to include information about rock quality assessment for unroped climbing activities, according to park documentation. It was February 12, 2016, when Minneapolis hosted its high school hockey championship at a packed indoor arena. The regulation ice surface maintained standard conditions, while 3,200 spectators filled the bleachers for the Friday night finale. Arena staff completed all pregame equipment inspections according to league protocols, confirming the boards, glass, and dasher systems were secure. Amory Wild, a 17-year-old senior, served as team captain for the visiting squad. School records showed Wild had 12 years of organized hockey experience, and team documentation noted he regularly logged heavy ice time. Coaches regarded him as a stable defensive presence who managed the blue line reliably. The game entered its third period with both teams tied at 2 goals apiece. Officials had verified all protective equipment before puck drop. Referees and line judges maintained proper spacing as cameras positioned throughout the arena documented the match from multiple angles. Following a timeout, Wild returned to his position near the blue line as play reset. Broadcast footage showed players skating at competitive speeds during normal game flow as the opposing forwards initiated an attack from deep in their zone. A breakout developed quickly. Video shows the attacking forward gaining speed while carrying the puck across center ice. Wild adjusted his stance near the blue line, angling his skates as he prepared to challenge the entry. Both players accelerated into the zone, covering the final distance in less than a second. Frame-by-frame review later revealed that their shoulders made contact at an oblique angle, rotating Wild's upper torso while his skates lost edge grip. As he fell backward, his lower body continued forward momentum, creating a whip-like motion through his neck. The left side of his helmet struck the ice first, followed by a secondary impact as his torso landed. The attacking player slid into the boards but stood up moments later. Wildy, however, remained motionless. Witnesses reported no protective reaction, no limb movement, and shallow, irregular breathing consistent with upper cervical spine trauma. Medical reviewers later noted that the combined rotational force and impact angle could easily transmit enough energy to fracture the C1 to C2 region. Officials stopped play immediately. Arena medical staff reached Wild within seconds, supporting his airway and stabilizing his helmet to prevent further spinal displacement. Video footage shows responders applying cervical spine precautions, while Wild exhibited no purposeful response. Emergency medical technicians secured him to a backboard and transferred him from the ice as arena personnel managed crowd control. Wildy was transported to Hennepin County Medical Center, where imaging studies documented severe traumatic brain injury with acute intracranial hemorrhage and a C2 cervical fracture. Intensive care protocols were initiated, but neurological assessments over the next 72 hours showed no improvement. Following required examinations and an apnea test, medical staff formally declared Wild brain dead. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as traumatic brain injury with a high cervical spine fracture. Documentation from the Regional Organ Procurement Organization recorded that Wild's family authorized organ donation, resulting in 5 successful transplants. League officials reviewed safety procedures after the incident. Records show expanded medical coverage requirements were added for future championship games, while equipment standards remained unchanged, because all protective gear functioned according to specifications. It was June 14th, 2019, when the Great Blue Hole off Belize offered exceptional diving conditions. Water temperature measured 78 degrees Fahrenheit, with visibility exceeding 100 feet throughout the circular sinkhole that dropped steeply into the Caribbean Sea. Charter operators had coordinated with local authorities for the planned deep dive excursion. Kellen Shaw, a 31-year-old marine industry worker, joined a guided dive to the famous limestone formation. Dive shop records showed Shaw held advanced open water certification with approximately 200 logged dives. His certification history indicated limited experience below 100 feet in depth. The dive plan called for a maximum depth of 130 feet using standard air mixture. The charter departed with Shaw, a certified dive guide, and 1 additional diver. Pre-dive briefings covered the planned route along the sinkhole's wall with emphasis on depth limits and buddy system protocols. Equipment checks verified the proper functioning of all gear before entry. Weather conditions remained calm with minimal surface current. Descent began along the limestone wall, with the guide leading and maintaining visual contact with both divers. The team followed standard procedures for deep diving with regular depth and air supply monitoring. Shaw's dive computer recorded a normal descent rate through the initial depth ranges. At approximately 100 feet, the guide performed routine safety checks with both divers. Shaw responded with standard hand signals indicating normal status. The team continued descending toward the planned maximum depth while maintaining close proximity according to deep diving protocols. At around 120 feet depth, the guide observed changes in Shaw's behavior and swimming patterns. Shaw's movements became less coordinated, and his response to hand signals appeared delayed. The guide attempted to establish closer contact with Shaw and signaled for ascent. Divers nearby later reported classic signs of nitrogen narcosis, slower hand responses, and delayed kicking rhythm. As he neared the deeper zone, the guide documented Shaw removing his regulator and making gestures toward marine life. When the guide moved closer to assist, Shaw pushed the guide away and swam deeper into the sinkhole. Such behavior is typical of severe narcosis, in which divers lose situational awareness and act irrationally rather than making conscious decisions. Shaw's dive computer data later showed he descended beyond the planned depth limit. The guide lost visual contact with Shaw as he continued descending. The guide surfaced with the remaining diver and immediately notified surface support of Shaw's failure to ascend. Emergency protocols were activated upon the guide's report to charter operators. Charter operators contacted local authorities to request technical diving resources for search and recovery operations. The Belize Coast Guard and technical dive teams responded to conduct deep water search procedures. Shaw's dive computer and equipment were later recovered during the operation. Technical divers located Shaw's body during the search operation. Recovery required specialized equipment and staged decompression procedures due to the depth. Shaw's dive computer data showed he had reached approximately 220 feet before the unit stopped recording. Reaching roughly 220 feet on standard air would also raise the partial pressure of oxygen to levels associated with CNS oxygen toxicity, making a sudden seizure or rapid loss of consciousness a plausible concurrent factor. The medical examiner determined drowning as the cause of death. The official report identified nitrogen narcosis as a contributing factor based on Shaw's documented behavior at depth and dive computer data showing descent beyond safe recreational limits on standard air mixture. Dive operators documented safety protocol reviews following the incident. Official records show updated briefing procedures for deep diving excursions to the Blue Hole site were implemented after the investigation concluded. It was November 21st, 2015, when Mount Washington, New Hampshire, experienced rapidly deteriorating weather conditions. Morning temperatures registered 15 degrees Fahrenheit, with winds building throughout the early hours. Weather monitoring stations recorded gusts reaching 45 miles per hour by mid-morning, creating wind chill values near -7 degrees Fahrenheit. Ilara Finch, a 16-year-old high school student, entered the annual 10-mile mountain trail race despite deteriorating conditions. School athletic records showed Finch as a competitive cross-country runner with multiple regional placements. Race registration indicated she wore lightweight running gear, typical for autumn conditions, rather than winter equipment. Race officials documented discussions about course conditions as the weather deteriorated beyond initial forecasts. The course featured aid stations spaced several miles apart, with limited shelter between checkpoints. Blowing snow reduced visibility measurements to approximately 50 yards across exposed ridge sections, according to weather instruments. The race proceeded with an 8 a.m. start time and documented safety warnings. Volunteers positioned themselves at regular intervals along the marked trail route. Radio communications linked all aid stations with race headquarters for continuous weather and participant monitoring. Race officials documented Finch maintaining a competitive pace through the initial miles. Aid station logs recorded her passage at scheduled checkpoints during the first half of the course. Radio transcripts indicate routine communication between stations regarding participant progress and weather conditions. Around mile 5, aid station volunteers documented Finch displaying visible shivering and reduced pace. Volunteers also noted her speech slowing and her hands fumbling with her water bottle, clear early indicators of dropping core temperature. Station records show volunteers offered additional clothing layers, which she declined before continuing along the marked route. Observer reports noted changes in her running mechanics at subsequent checkpoints. Volunteers documented Finch leaving the packed trail and entering snowdrifts near mile 6. Aid station logs record the time required for her to return to the marked course. Personnel at the next checkpoint documented unclear speech patterns when she passed their station. By mile 8, course volunteers found Finch sitting beside the trail and unresponsive to verbal communication. Radio logs document immediate contact with race headquarters. Volunteers placed her in an emergency shelter, added insulation materials, and administered warm fluids according to documented protocols. Mountain rescue coordination was contacted through official channels. Weather conditions prevented helicopter operations, according to flight service records. Rescue personnel deployed tracked vehicles to reach the location while volunteers maintained documented warming procedures. Ground rescue teams documented active rewarming procedures during evacuation. Transport logs show extended time required due to terrain and weather constraints. Emergency department records document continued intervention upon hospital arrival. Medical records show Finch was pronounced dead upon arrival at the regional medical facility. Hospital documentation recorded core body temperature at 27.8 degrees Celsius. The medical examiner determined severe hypothermia as the official cause of death based on autopsy findings. Weather Service records confirmed environmental conditions during the event. The medical examiner's report cited cold exposure as the primary factor, with no underlying medical conditions. Race organizers documented policy reviews and implemented mandatory cold weather gear requirements for future events. It was September 8, 2018, when Lake Tahoe presented ideal conditions for open water swimming. Water temperature held steady at 62 degrees Fahrenheit, with light chop and clear skies stretching across the alpine lake. Event organizers had positioned escort kayaks and coordinated with the local sheriff's marine unit for safety coverage. Tallulah Kincaid, a 28-year-old recreation worker from Sacramento, entered the annual 10-mile crossing event. Race documentation showed she had completed 6 previous long-distance swims and maintained water safety certifications. Registration records indicated she wore a full wetsuit with scheduled feeding arrangements. The crossing began with timed checkpoints and roving rescue boats monitoring swimmer progress. Kincaid's assigned kayaker maintained visual contact throughout the early miles, while radio communications tracked participant positions by bib numbers. Weather monitoring equipment recorded stable conditions with minimal current. The kayaker reported normal progress through the first several miles. Race logs document regular feeding stops and steady forward movement during scheduled check-ins with race coordination. Radio traffic indicated routine communication between the escort and the swimmer during this phase. Around the halfway point, the kayaker documented changes in Kincaid's swimming pattern. Race logs show she reported experiencing chest discomfort, but continued swimming while staying close to her escort. The kayaker observed irregular stroke rate and multiple pauses where she treaded water near the kayak. Open water athletes often mistake early cardiac symptoms for routine cold water tightness, which may explain why she opted to continue. In athletes with hidden structural heart issues, dangerous arrhythmias can develop within seconds, offering little warning before collapse. The kayaker reported observing pallor in Kincaid's face and labored breathing between strokes. Radio logs document her communication of breathing difficulty before she lost responsiveness and went below the surface. The escort immediately supported her airway and activated emergency signals using whistle blasts and radio communication. The kayaker brought Kincaid alongside the escort boat with assistance from other personnel. Once aboard the support vessel, medical personnel began resuscitation efforts and applied an automated external defibrillator. Responders quickly dried her upper torso so the pads could adhere properly, a necessary step for AED use around water. Radio traffic documented the medical response procedures being implemented. The county sheriff's marine unit intercepted the escort boat during transport toward shore. Radio communications recorded ongoing resuscitation attempts during the transit to the lakeside medical staging area. Multiple responders participated in the evacuation, according to documented protocols. At the dock facility, emergency medical personnel continued intervention attempts. Radio logs document the medical response until resuscitation efforts were discontinued. Responding paramedics pronounced Kincaid deceased at the staging area. The autopsy identified a sudden cardiac arrhythmia associated with an undiagnosed structural heart condition. The medical examiner's report classified the death as exercise-induced sudden cardiac arrest. Examination findings showed no external trauma or drowning indicators. Event organizers reviewed safety protocols following the incident. Documentation shows updates included enhanced on-water extraction procedures and reinforced medical screening disclosure requirements for future participants. Mandatory cardiac testing was not implemented for recreational events. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.